Alright, so the Resident Evil Code Veronica remake just got announced at the 2026 Summer Game Fest, and if you know me, you know that I'm a huge fan of the original game. It's what really made me fall in love with the franchise, and it got me back into making YouTube videos. So of course I had to make a video talking about the reveal trailer. What I'm gonna do is go frame by frame and talk about everything that stood out to me, and I'll also be comparing it to the original game. I'll be talking about very light spoilers, nothing substantial, nothing more than what you'll see in the trailers. So the game starts off in Paris, France during the winter. In the very first shot, you see a large building in the background with an umbrella logo, and then the next shot has a red car passing by a cafe called Café de Parapluie, if that's how you even pronounce it. But the important part is that it translates to Umbrella Cafe. The cafe even has the same red and white colors as the umbrella logo. Now, in previous Resident Evil games, there have been files that spoke about Umbrella having influence in other countries. It was never just America. For example, in Resident Evil 3, there was a shipping notice where you find out that the Nemesis was created in the European branch of Umbrella. And then you have Resident Evil 4, which took place in Spain, where Umbrella also had some influence there, primarily with Luis, who worked for them and had his own laboratory. I even remember seeing some boxes with the Umbrella logo on it. Umbrella had already been defeated by the star of Resident Evil 4, but Code Veronica takes place a couple months after Resident Evil 2. So at this point, Umbrella is still around, and that's why you see their logo on the building. However, I am a bit surprised by this first shot because I never got the impression that Umbrella had such a huge influence overseas. You can see that their facility in Paris is right in the middle of the city, and it even towers over all the other buildings. Now, in the original game, we never actually got to see Paris, and instead the game starts off with Claire infiltrating the Umbrella facility. And outside the facility, you can see that there are many trees, which I thought implied that the facility was in a remote location far away from the city. So either these two locations that we see in the trailer and the original game are different, or it was changed for the remake, but I'll come back to this later. Regardless, it's a cool way of showing how much of a threat Umbrella is with their influence being all over the world. Plus, showcasing all these different settings helps make the game feel more alive and helps improve the atmosphere. In the same shot of the Umbrella Cafe, we see a red car which I thought belonged to Claire simply because it's the color red, but I zoomed in and maybe it's just a random guy. It's hard to tell. But the license plate says 1126SP75, and I'm sure that this is a reference to something, but I have no idea what it could be, so if you know, please let me know in the comments. We then see Claire holding a map with an address to the place Chris was staying at, and the address can be translated to Chestnut Tree Alley. At least that's what Google Translate says. Again, I have no clue if this address is a reference to something, so help me out in the comments if you know. We then have this old lady who opens the door, and she's the concierge of the building, which is basically like a caretaker or a manager. And to me, this old lady is very suspicious. My initial theory is that she works for Umbrella either willingly or unwillingly. Maybe she's someone that Umbrella installed as the manager of the building so she can report everything to them, or the lady could just be an innocent person, but Umbrella found a way to access any information she might have. I'm sure that Umbrella has tabs on everything going on in the city. You know, when the old lady mentioned the sister of the man on the third floor, I immediately thought of Claire and Chris, and that this could possibly be the Code Veronica remake. But I quickly put that aside because, like I said, this Paris section wasn't in the original game, so I just kept wondering what it could be. Of course, I was pleasantly surprised when it ended up being the Code Veronica remake. I want to say, I really like this addition of Claire doing more detective work in search for her brother. It was a small complaint that I had with Resident Evil 2 and Code Veronica, where I wish we could have seen Claire do a little bit more in her search for Chris, and it seems like we're kind of getting that here. We then move on to Chris's room, which is a complete mess where you see paper, cigarettes, and pills all over the place. You know, I think this scene, despite it being short, does a good job of humanizing Chris a little bit more by showing how the mansion incident really affected him. It's similar to Jill at the beginning of the Resident Evil 3 remake. Remember, Code Veronica is Chris's first appearance since the first Resident Evil game, but we really never got a chance to see how he was feeling after everything had happened. And although he's not in the scene, I think the room speaks to his mental state and is a great addition to the remake. Moving on, we hear a telephone ringing, and the old lady mentions it must be the maintenance men from this morning. Now, were these maintenance men just regular people, or were they actually part of Umbrella? And does the old lady know that and was lying to Claire? I just can't shake the feeling that she's in on all this, especially with how a hunk or a hunk lookalike shows up right after she leaves the room. You gotta ask yourself, why is it that Chris left the building? Did he know that Umbrella had caught on to him? Clearly he didn't feel safe there anymore, and I think it has something to do with the old lady. But of course, I could just be making something out of nothing, and maybe this old lady is a perfectly nice person. In the end, it doesn't really matter because the point is, Umbrella was keeping an eye on Chris and Claire. We then get a quick montage of many different locations and characters, and it was this moment where I realized that we're actually getting the Code Veronica remake. Let's go through it scene by scene because there's a lot I want to talk about. The first location that we see is a forest. On the very right, it looks like there's a fence or a gate, and then in the middle you can see something that is red and white next to the light source. Now, I don't recall any sort of setting like this in the original. Rockford Island from afar does have a lot of trees, but you don't actually see anyone exploring the area. So this frame could just be some random forest on the island with no real significance. It doesn't necessarily have to be a location that we can explore. Or maybe it's a completely new part of the map, in that case there's not much to say. However, I think the most likely option is that this forest is an existing location and they're just changing it up a bit to give the game some more life. The gate and the fence does make it seem like one of the earlier locations that you can explore. Although I do have one more idea that I thought was pretty cool. I mentioned that the original game opened up with a cutscene of Claire in the Umbrella Paris facility in a big chase scene. She then gets captured and imprisoned on Rockford Island, and it was one of the coolest moments in the entire game. But it seems like the remake is taking taking things in a different direction. Here in the trailer, it implies that she got captured not in the facility, but in Chris's apartment, and that's how she got sent to the island. Now here's the thing, I find it hard to believe that Capcom would remove this opening sequence. I know that many people were disappointed with the Resident Evil 3 remake for doing stuff like that, but I'd like to believe that they're not going to make the same mistake twice. So the next question is, where does this scene from the original game take place in the remake? Now I think most people would probably say the tall building with the umbrella logo is the facility that Claire infiltrates. But in the original game, you can see that there's actually a bunch of trees outside the facility, which doesn't really fit with the building that we saw in the trailer. Again, it could just be something they changed for the remake, but maybe there's another facility that we haven't seen yet, and this shot of a forest is alluding to it. Now I know I've just been yapping over one frame of a forest, but the main point I want to get across is that I highly doubt they'll be removing the infiltration scene. It's just way too cool of a moment, and if that's not how the game is going to start off, then we just have to figure out when and where it'll happen. Alright, enough of that, let's move on to the next shot, which is a room with a bunch of industrial fans. I don't remember seeing these fans anywhere in the original game, but in the next shot you can see that these fans are on the upper floor of a room, and these two floors reminded me of the underground portion of the military training facility which had similar infrastructure. After that, we see the letter V, which of course stands for Veronica, but I saw someone point out that you can also interpret it as the 5th game in the franchise, which of course is right because it goes Resident Evil 1, 0, 2, 3, and then Code Veronica is the 5th. And you know what got me thinking, is that why the developers originally chose the name Veronica? Like, I know that the in-story reason is because of Veronica Ashford or the Code Veronica project, but why did the developers even name her Veronica to begin with? I never really made the connection until now that they could have just been looking for a name that starts with V because it's the 5th game. The next shot shows a computer that says please insert your card and two other lines that I can't quite make out. I think I can see the words on and work, but I don't know what the rest says. At first I thought this was the 3D printer from the beginning of the game because it kind of looks like it and you can even see the word scan. However, the printer in the original game never actually required you to insert a card. Now, they probably just changed it for the remake, but there were also a bunch of random computers throughout Code Veronica, so it's hard to say if this is the 3D printer or another computer. After that, we see a room covered in wires, and I wasn't able to figure out what this location is. My first thought was that it might be a room from the second half of the game, and I'll put it on screen, but I don't want to say the name of the location because it's a spoiler. That said, I think everything shown in the trailer is from the very beginning of the game with Claire, so it's probably not the room that I'm talking about. Another idea I had is that this could be a washroom. The floor tiles look familiar, and I feel like I've seen them in washrooms throughout the previous Resident Evil games. Next, we see an ant and a dragonfly. Of course, this imagery is connected to the Ashford family, and it's not the last time we'll be seeing these symbols. As for this next shot, I have no idea where it takes place, but I do remember that red lights would flash whenever an alarm would go off, so it really could be any room on the island. Then we see a dead officer with a gun in his hand, and it reminds me of the officer that we see in the changing room of the military training facility. It's not exactly one-to-one, but it's what I thought of when I saw him. After that, we get a better look at the Rockford prison, and I remember walking by this area multiple times in the original, so it was pretty surreal to see it with modern graphics. The shot of the two helicopters flying to the island is pretty much identical to one of the first scenes in the original game. Next is the gold Lugers, but their design is slightly different. They now have the Ashford Hawk emblem outlined on the frame. We then see a character wearing a hoodie, and I'm 99% sure this is Steve because of the hair, and plus who else would it be? I'm really excited to see how the remake handles him because I think he has the potential to be one of the highlights of the game. I think all of the problems that people had with Steve in the original game are easily fixable. It also looks like he's standing near the forest area that we saw earlier, and I think that's the lighthouse in the background, which is where Steve was first introduced. It really does seem like everything in the trailer comes from the first couple of hours of the game. Next up is the Ashford Palace, and it looks amazing. These mansion environments are always my favorite part of every single Resident Evil game. They're always visually impressive and a lot of fun to explore. You can tell that this is the Ashford Palace because it has the same large painting in the middle, but there are plenty of changes that the remake made. The biggest difference is that there are now two staircases instead of one. The computer also looks to have been removed, and there's now a new doorway on the ground floor. There were also a lot of smaller changes. The room now has more chandeliers, balconies, some plants, redesigned walls and railings, and a bunch of red flags near the central painting. In the original game, there were blue flags next to the entrance, and I wonder if they're still there, or that concept was replaced by the red flags that we see next to the painting. There's also this circular pattern on the walls. I don't know what the right terminology is, but I'm glad to see an updated version of it in the remake. This next shot shows Alfred Ashford, and I think this moment is supposed to be his first appearance and his first interaction with Claire. His design is now a little different. In the remake, he's now wearing black pants, a black vest, and white gloves, whereas in the original, he wore white pants, a white vest, and no gloves. I don't know why they made this change, but I think it actually makes him look cooler, and you know, Alfred can be a pretty goofy villain at times, but this one frame made him look pretty intimidating. The room behind them also looks different from the palace lobby that we just saw. You can see a red wall, a couch, a lamp, and I think even a painting. Even the design of the guard railings look a little different from the lobby. It reminds me of the saved room on the upper floor of the palace from the original game. We then get a wide shot of Rockford Island, and I'll highlight some parts that you should take a closer look at. I don't want to spoil too much, but you can see that this island has more than just a prison and a mansion. And then finally we return to the scene from the beginning of the trailer where someone is holding a knife to Claire's neck. What's surprising is that the character who attacked Claire seems to be Hunk. It's pretty crazy because I think this would be the first time that Hunk is directly involved in a main story. I haven't played every Resident Evil game yet, but from what I know, he's usually a character that stays in the background and does his own thing. But I think this might be the first time that he interacts with the main character. Of course, it's possible that this isn't Hunk, and I saw people mention that it could be Rodrigo but in a uniform. However, we know from a file in Code Veronica that Hunk had been to Rockford Island and was involved in some things in the background of the game. I'm not going to show the full file because maybe it's going to become a legit part of the story. Whether it's hunk or not, at the very least it's a big deviation from the original game where none of this ever happened. Now although Claire's in a bad spot here, I will say her expression is really cool. She seems surprisingly calm despite the situation that she's in. And then lastly, the trailer ends with Claire inside of her prison cell. It's very similar to how the original game started, where we see her looking down at a bottle of hemostatic medicine. The big difference is that now it looks like zombies attack her while she's imprisoned. In the original game, Claire didn't encounter any zombies until she walked out of the prison, so it looks like they've merged the prison and the graveyard sequences together. So yeah, that's all we got from the trailer, but there were some official images released that I want to talk about. Regarding Claire's design, I think they nailed it. It feels like the perfect combination of her designs from the original Code Veronica and the Resident Evil 2 remake. I remember seeing people say that they weren't the biggest fans of her design in the 2 remake, which always surprised me because I thought that she looked really cool in the red leather jacket. But I don't know, maybe it's just one of those things where you're attached to whatever you saw first. So my first introduction to Claire was through the 2 remake, so I'm quite fond of that design. People who played the original game probably lean more to the other design. But either way, the thing that I really associate with Claire is the color red. It doesn't matter to me if she's wearing a jacket or a vest or a shirt as long as it's red. That said, I think I prefer it being a brighter shade of red, but the darker maroon color fits the survival horror setting a little better, so I'm more than happy with the change. One interesting detail is that the choker that she wears is different in the remake. In the original game, it's simply part of the outfit that she's wearing. She even had it when invading the facility. In the remake, however, she doesn't have it during the Chris apartment scene, but is wearing it once she's imprisoned. It now resembles the collar that Steve wore in the original, suggesting that it's something that all the prisoners wear. There was also some discussion online about whether Claire had received a completely new face model because of how different she looked in that scene where she got captured. However, when you look at her face at the end of the trailer, you can see that it's very similar to the model in the Resident Evil 2 remake. I think in some of the more happy or wholesome moments in the game where Claire is smiling or laughing, you'll be able to see more and more similarities between the two models. One thing I like is how you can tell that Leon and Claire have been through a lot when comparing their Resident Evil 2 designs to their new ones in Resident Evil 4 and now Veronica. The effects of the Raccoon City incident are very evident on their faces, and I think it's a great touch. And lastly, the game is titled Resident Evil Veronica instead of Code Veronica. To be honest, it's going to be hard for me to call it anything but Code Veronica, though I think it's a nice simple change. But yeah, that's everything I want to talk about. I'm sure that I missed a few things, so let me know in the comments if you spotted anything interesting or if there was a particular moment that stood out to you. Also, if you've played the original game, then please go check out my previous video where I talk about it in more detail. I'm also currently working on a video about the Separate Ways DLC in the Resident Evil 4 remake. So if you would like to see more Resident Evil content, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know your thoughts on the reveal trailer down below. Thanks for watching.
Don't move. Claire Redfield.